A body burned beyond recognition.
You couldn't tell the race, you couldn't tell the age.
And a collection of evidence proving someone has a secret to hide.
The fingerprints did not belong to David Stevens. So we have a mystery female that's been in this apartment.
It's a horrifying tale of passion and deceit, revealing the most unlikely of suspects.
This is like something out of a Hollywood movie. Really, could this have happened?
Every crime leaves clues, but deciphering the story they tell takes a detective.
Sun, sand, and a home by the ocean. A life most people can only dream of. Not David Stevens. He had a beach property in Southern California, a well-paid job in marketing, and a wealth of friends to help him enjoy his success. But during Christmas 1998, David Stevens' American dream was about to tragically unravel.
The city of San Diego glimmers in what seems to be eternal sunshine. And when the sun goes down, the night comes alive with crowds at a constellation of bars and clubs.
It's a great place to live. You know, it's a beach community and everybody's pretty laid back.
Which is why no one could have predicted the unspeakable crime that unfolded late one winter night. It was around 4:30 a.m., 2 days before Christmas, when a car exploded into flames on San Diego's La Jolla Scenic Drive.
The fire department was advised by some residents in the area that they had heard an explosion.
Fire department shows up. There's a car on fire, and they just think it's, you know, an accident.
And they observed the vehicle on the side of the road, well involved in flame, with flame height of estimated approximately 20 feet.
After the blaze is put out, firefighters make a gruesome discovery: a charred body inside the wreckage. At daylight, investigators scour the scene for evidence.
The body was found on the passenger seat. The passenger seat had been reclined fully, so the body was essentially prone, but the body was also face down. Not a situation where you would expect somebody who was a passenger in a vehicle.
It had been quite an extensive fire that really did a lot of damage and destroyed potentially almost any kind of possibility of evidence in the car.
Crimes of this nature are almost unheard of in La Jolla, which means the jewel in Spanish. This is one of the wealthiest enclaves in San Diego. Its scenic drive winds up to the top of Mount Soledad with its breathtaking views of the city and the ocean. But it has little traffic at night.
This particular road at 4 in the morning was virtually deserted. There was a very strong odor consistent with gasoline coming from the passenger compartment of the vehicle. It was clear that the fire started in the passenger compartment, not in the engine compartment.
The body is burned beyond recognition. Dental records must be used to identify these remains.
You couldn't tell the race, you couldn't tell the age, you couldn't even tell what kind of clothing the individual had been wearing because it had all been consumed in the fire.
But investigators are able to glean some clues at the scene and note the body has a striking injury.
What I thought was remarkable is there clearly was a skull fracture, which was kind of consistent with bullet holes.
It looks like the victim was shot in the head. It also appears that the car fire was no accident.
This was, in fact, an incendiary or an intentionally set fire. In layman's terms, it was an arson fire.
Detectives run the vehicle's tags.
There was a Kansas license plate on the car, and I was able to learn that the registered owner was a David Stevens.
And that 38-year-old David Stevens has an address in the Pacific Beach area, less than 5 miles from the crime scene.
Hello.
A building manager gives detectives access into David's apartment.
Is this a picture of Mr. Stevens? Oh, yeah, that's it. What do you got?
There's no one inside and no sign of a struggle. The apartment is meticulously neat, but 2 used glasses have been left on a table. One has a lipstick stain on the rim.
In the bedroom, they found some very telling things.
The bed was unmade, which seemed out of character for this very neat apartment. He had a mirrored headboard, and we had these fingered and palm prints on the headboard of very small hands. We assumed that they may be a female's hands. We also found some long black hairs in the sink.
It was clear there was an intimate relationship between Mr. Stevens and some woman in the hours preceding the murder.
At this point, we're not really sure what David Stevens' role here is. He's missing. Our first goal is to see if we can establish if David Stevens is alive.
The manager leads police downstairs to the apartment where David's boss, Carl Withrow, lives.
They asked me if I knew David Stevens, and when they did, I immediately just thought he was in some type of trouble.
He was devastated to the point that he's crying, he's physically upset, that the idea that David may, in fact, have been murdered.
I was stunned.
We found his car.
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I couldn't believe what they were telling me. I had just spoke to him the night before.
The detectives are taken aback by Carl's emotional reaction.
I talked to him about 8 or 9 last night.
They wondered if Carl maybe had somehow been involved and this was an act.
By his own admission, Carl is one of the last people to talk to David.
He told me that David had worked the night before and that he was supposed to get off about 9 p.m. So we basically knew that David was alive at least at 9 p.m. the night before.
But Carl says he didn't hear David come in the night before. A forensic team is called in to carefully gather the evidence in David's apartment. The next day, on Christmas Eve, dental records confirm the victim's identity.
The autopsy also revealed that he had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head, and that was, in fact, what killed him.
It also noted that David was dead before the fire was set. The case is now officially a homicide. Detectives looking to solve David's murder now probe deeper into his life. They learn David, a telemarketer, moved from Kansas to San Diego less than a year earlier. A native of Nebraska, David had always yearned for beach life and year-round sunshine.
His whole life, he wanted to come to California. He wanted to live in California. When he landed in San Diego, he was exactly where he wanted to be. He enjoyed everything about it.
David was close friends with his boss, Carl Withrow.
We lived right between La Jolla and Pacific Beach. We had a beautiful ocean view. He kept himself in good shape. We were on the beach almost every day. When we weren't at work, David was a workaholic. He loved to work. He was very good at what he did.
But there was something missing from the good life in San Diego. Romance.
Hi, my name is David Stevens. I'm from Nebraska, new here to San Diego, and I'm looking for a girl with a great smile and enjoys long walks on the beach.
Carl ran a dating agency called Perfect Match. David originally came in as a client.
David was at a point in his life where he was trying to find someone to share his life with. He was very serious, very sincere about finding someone to date, enjoy, and eventually marry.
Interviews, and I moved out here with all my telemarketing experience. I was hired on there as a manager. Absolutely.
As it happened, Carl had been looking for a new telemarketing manager and offered the job to David.
Just probably one of the greatest guys that I'd ever met. Very honest, very sincere, just an all-around good person.
David Stevens seemed like the last person anyone would want to kill. Yet police think there are probably two people connected with his murder. Given the remote spot where the car was found, it's believed that the perpetrator would have needed help to escape undetected. Then, an important break. Phone records show that someone called David from the security phone in his lobby on the night he was killed.
We learned that someone buzzed his apartment at about 3 o'clock in the morning. Now, that's all we know. There was no security cameras, there's no caller ID or anything like that.
The visitor called just an hour and a half before the car carrying David's body went up in flames on La Jolla Scenic Drive in the dead of night. "38-year-old David Stevens has been brutally shot to death. His charred body was found in a burning vehicle. Arson investigators believe that the killer would have been burnt too.
The suspect stood right next to the vehicle and threw in some type of burning material. And it's the vapors that ignite, not the liquid itself.
The explosion would have flash burned the person who lit the fire. It's a clue that may come in handy, but for now, doesn't help identify a suspect.
We did have officers check all the local hospitals, and they didn't report any burn victims.
Although his friends thought David wasn't dating anyone, evidence says otherwise.
The fingerprints that we found off the headboard did not belong to David Stevens. So we have a mystery female that's been in this apartment.
But the tantalizing clue of the fingerprints on the headboard fails to shed light on who killed David Stevens. Investigators comb all of the local and national databases, but find no match. Detectives circle back to David's own boss and what they consider to be his overly emotional reaction to David's death.
Gentlemen, how can I help you? Just had a few follow-up questions for you.
They would come into my office 2 or 3 times a week, asking the craziest of questions.
Was he by any chance?
It became very apparent that these questions were somewhat accusatory and that I was certainly under suspicion of having something to do with it.
Sorry to work here.
I sort of recall a telephone conversation with him, and what I told him was, everybody's a suspect and everybody's a witness.
Carl, we'd like you to take a lie detector test.
I spoke to a friend of mine that was an attorney. He said, this is a capital murder case. If you go in and fail this lie detector test, you could end up in prison. That's enough to scare anyone.
Nevertheless, he agrees to the polygraph and passes. The police conclude he is not involved and turn their attention elsewhere. They want to know if there was a secret in David's personal life that led to his murder.
2 shots through the head, dousing with gasoline and set on fire. This was a crime of rage.
Perhaps the 2 suspects they're looking for were involved in a fatal lover's triangle with their victim.
We came up with the working theory that it was a woman and a man. The woman had been involved sexually with David Stevens, and the man somehow involved with the woman.
Police believe that whoever buzzed David in the middle of the night lured him out of his apartment to his death. But there are no witnesses to identify his mysterious caller. If David had a secret lover, his friend Carl had no clue.
We always joked with David that David did not date a lot. He spent most of his time working. He would meet girls, he would talk to them, but it generally didn't go much further than that.
David spent a lot of time with Carl, who introduced him to San Diego nightlife and the club scene downtown. One place they frequented was an upscale adult entertainment club called Dancers.
We would stop by there once a week. David would get an opportunity to talk to the girls. He would buy 1 beer, he would sip on it all evening long.
Carl tells investigators he suspects that there might be some connection between dancers at the club and David's death.
They had asked me if I knew of any female that would have been at David's apartment. And quite frankly, I had no clue. If there was a female, I was fairly certain that would have been one of the dancers from the club that we went to. Because other than that, I didn't know David of having a relationship with any female.
The regular dancers at the club remember David and his attempts to make friends.
I make it a rule to never date my clients. Yeah, that's the number one rule.
Usually sat at the bar with his boss. Didn't really get any lap dances or any kind of activity like that.
The dancers actually spoke very highly of David. He was always polite and he was always courteous to them.
They also learned that David had been coming to the club alone.
I was always concerned about him going there by himself. I didn't want him to go in and be taken advantage of.
Did David have a run-in with one of the dancers' boyfriends? The women hint that David had a thing for a dancer who came and went from the club. They know her only by her stage name, India.
I mean, he watches us all, but
yeah, but
he's got eyes for India.
What do you mean he's here for India?
Are they dating, or he just comes in to see her?
I'm sure they hook up.
They hook up.
By law, exotic dancers in San Diego have their fingerprints on file at the police department, but none of the dancers at the club has prints that match the ones left in David's apartment.
I found when I interviewed the dancers that they were very upfront. Well, innocent people only know one story, and they only know the truth, and that's all they ever tell. But they weren't involved, and that's what they told us, and we were able to corroborate that out.
The case is frustrating. Months into the investigation, despite the DNA evidence and the fingerprints, there are no viable leads to a suspect.
They had nothing.
Sergeant Martin?
A reporter called Sergeant Martin and asked him where the case was, and Sergeant Martin said, quote, "We're stumped," end quote.
Deeply shaken by David's death, his family is angered by the lack of progress.
And I'm wanting closure on this thing so we can go about our lives. Our family is suffering a lot on this.
David's family was so devastated by his death. They wanted answers. They wanted to know why his murder hadn't been solved, and we all did too.
As the investigation grows cold, family members become very frustrated with the police. I mean, I understand their loved one's gone. They think that we've lost interest. Well, sometimes we just don't have the leads to run down.
But their luck turns in March of 1999. Investigators finally track down the exotic dancer known as India. She says she had occasionally gone out with David in the fall of 1998.
She'd gone to breakfast with him a couple times, and I think she may have even gone out on a date with him. They weren't exclusive. They certainly weren't romantic. She spoke highly of him. She said he was always very nice, very polite, but it just wasn't meant to be.
The dancer cooperates, but neither her DNA nor her fingerprints matches those of the woman in David's apartment.
She was clearly not the woman we were looking for.
San Diego detectives had collected fingerprints and DNA, interviewed friends and co-workers, and tracked down every possible lead. But a year after David Stevens' charred body had been discovered, they still didn't have a suspect. And for a homicide investigation, few facts are more troubling to deal with than the passage of time.
The case got very cold.
Yes.
There was nothing we could prove there, nothing that really led us down the path any closer to the suspect.
Every clue, everything that we thought would make a difference ended up just being a brick wall.
The mystery woman he had a tryst with the night he was killed remains anonymous. A caller ID box found in David Stevens' apartment recorded the numbers of more than 30 callers. Police discovered most of them were employees. Investigators talked to them, but learned nothing new.
I don't really remember, but I might have called him around Christmas time for my hours.
So we didn't really have anything that would point the finger at anybody off of the phone there because there was nothing out of the ordinary.
Reconstructing the timeline of David's last hours, detectives learned that he had let all his employees go early.
I noticed you guys have leftover Christmas shopping still to get done. Why don't we get out a couple hours early? Sound good?
Business was slow because of the holidays. But could he have had an ulterior motive? Was he planning a rendezvous with a woman he didn't want any of his employees to see? Scrambling for answers, detectives arranged for Crime Stoppers to run a segment on the David Stevens case and air it on the local news right after the 2001 Super Bowl. And they get a hit. An unidentified male caller says a woman told him she knows who killed David Stevens.
He stated, go contact Kathy Newkirk. That Kathy Newkirk knew a female and a male who confessed to her to killing David Stevens.
The tipster adds that the female connected to the homicide is a dancer named India. The name immediately rings a bell.
I interviewed her in March of 1999, right here. I interviewed her at the strip club, Dancers.
India is the dancer who'd gone out with David briefly and who had checked out 2 years earlier in 1999. Her fingerprints didn't match the ones on David's headboard. Now investigators want to talk to Kathy Newkirk, the woman pointing a finger at her.
Kathy Newkirk?
Yes.
In Kathy Newkirk's apartment, they notice something unusual.
So what is up with the fruit and candles there?
I practice Santeria. It's my shrine. Go have a seat.
She tells us right up front that she's into Santeria and that she, in effect, is like a lay priestess.
Santeria is an African-based religion related to voodoo.
She tells us that the dancer is also into Santeria.
Kathy tells them she and India were once lovers, but India left her for a man. Kathy knew India had also dated David. She says that made India's boyfriend angry, and he killed David in a jealous rage.
The dancer came to her and said, we killed this person, what do we do with them? Kathy then says to the dancer, your sign is fire. So fire is the way that you need to address this, and that she directs them to burn the body and burn it in a car.
Although Kathy's story seems outlandish, investigators have long believed that David was killed because he was part of a lover's triangle. India, her boyfriend, and David. That makes 3. But if the police are right, the female DNA and fingerprints in his apartment should belong to the woman in the fatal trio. India's hadn't been a match.
It was intriguing that she named someone that we interviewed early on in the investigation, but yet again, it was perplexing because the physical evidence had cleared her out.
Perhaps they overlooked something.
It was one of those things where you were torn. This is so far-fetched, it can't be true, but yet there's some facts that could.
It had a lot more validity than anything we'd had so far. He might have been murdered as a part of these voodoo ceremonies or a conflict that arose out of those.
This is like something out of a Hollywood movie. Really, could this have happened? Is this some kind of a cult murder thing?
India is now working as a stripper in Las Vegas. They ask Kathy to make a recorded call to India to see if she'll back up her claims. But Kathy refuses.
I can't call it.
Over time, Kathy's story keeps changing.
Initially, it was the boyfriend killed him out of jealousy, and then the 2 of them killed David because they were involved in some kind of illicit drugs. So the story changed I think, somewhat remarkable each time we talked to her.
For the prosecutor on the case, the pieces don't fit the puzzle.
They fit the framework, but the pieces were wrong.
Not the right people, I'm sorry. You gotta keep looking.
But the break that finally cracks the case comes out of the blue. It starts with a call straight to the homicide division. A young woman named Nee Norn has quite a story to tell.
Sergeant?
Yeah.
We just got a call from a Nee Norn saying that she thinks she knows who killed David Stevens.
Well, grab John and go get her.
Yes, sir.
Nearly 3 years after David Stevens' brutal murder, detectives usher a young woman named Nee Norn into an interrogation room at San Diego Police Headquarters.
Apparently, she had told one of her coworkers that she was in an abusive relationship, wanted out, and she had this secret that she had been carrying around for years. So she was convinced by this coworker to call police, and she did.
Soon after meeting her, the police realized they've spoken to this woman before. Early in the investigation, she'd told them she had called David to ask about her work schedule the night he was killed. Now she admits she lied about that.
David and I met at a perfect match. We worked together, and we liked each other. I didn't want my boyfriend to know.
She tells detectives a strange and terrible tale.
Perfect match, this is David.
In December of 1998, Nee Norn had been working part-time at Perfect Match for only a few months.
There was really nothing that stood out about her. She's a very pretty young lady, did a good job. All of the girls in that room respected David, enjoyed working for him, and she was no different.
Unbeknownst to Carl, though, a shared attraction was growing between David and Nee.
She talked about what a good guy he was and how gentle he was with her and sweet, and that she liked him. He started developing a bit of a crush, and it was probably mutual.
David was Nee's secret Santa at the office, and he left her little presents.
That was probably the event that most closely got them together to the point where they wanted to go out on a date together.
They made plans to get together, but kept it secret.
She initiated a phone call to David stating that she was open, she was available. Did they want to meet tonight? She said, well, I'll come over and we'll meet at work and we'll go from there. Well, David doesn't want coworkers to see Nee show up at work. So he then cuts everybody loose from work a couple hours early.
All the employees had gone home by the time David met Nee in the parking garage. They were going to go to a movie, but decided it was too late and drove in separate cars to David's home instead.
Hey, can you give me your address?
Just follow me.
Okay.
When Nee Norn was with him that night, that was the first time they had ever gone anywhere together.
David warned Nee that his boss, Carl, lives downstairs.
One of the things he told her was, to be extremely quiet, because if I heard him, he was in a world of trouble.
Thanks. My boss actually lives downstairs.
And that would have been true.
The two, slowly and tentatively, got to know each other.
Yeah, these are my favorite.
And the two of them ended up having sex throughout the evening. She then has to go home.
Nee left David's apartment sometime after 1 a.m. He had wanted her to stay the night, but she said she had to go home. She had a compelling reason. Nee was only 18, but David was not the only man she was involved with. She was also the mistress of Ronald Barker, a married man twice her age. She had met the Vietnamese American online.
He was very secretive with Nee Norn, although he did tell her that he was in the mafia and had killed people before, and just gave her a line of baloney that because of her immature years, she believed. He was very controlling.
And unbeknownst to her, while she's at David's, Ronald Barker's trying to get a hold of her.
He had her on a pager, and he paged her many, many times during the night when she was with David.
Nee tells the detectives she'd left her pager at home. When she got back to her house around 2 a.m., a shock awaited her.
Are you crazy?
Nee says Barker was violently angry that she hadn't responded to his pages all night.
Where have you been? Huh?
I was shopping.
Shopping for what?
When he didn't believe her excuses, she took a different tack.
I was at my boss's place.
Your boss's?
He made me sleep with him.
She confessed to having sex with her boss, but she told him she'd been raped.
He raped you.
He doesn't buy that, but he is furious with her, and he's not overly happy with this other guy.
Who's this guy? I want to see him. Tonight! I want to see him tonight! Where he live? Where does he live?
So the two of them hatch this plan about killing David Stevens. The killing of David Stevens is somehow going to right this wrong of infidelity that has occurred here.
Come on, let's go.
Ronald Barker gave her two choices. One, he would end the relationship. Or two, they would go kill David Stevens. And she agreed to go kill David Stevens.
Let's go.
It can't happen without Nee, because Ronald Barker doesn't know who David Stevens is, doesn't know his name, doesn't know how to find him, doesn't know where he lives. So Nee is the pathfinder. She's the facilitator to make all this happen.
Nee and Barker drove to David's apartment.
Oh. David?
Me?
Yeah, it's me. I got a flat tire. Can you come out and help me?
She'd lure him out by saying she was having car trouble. Knowing that David, being David, would help her.
Yeah, I'll be right down. In a minute.
It wouldn't have mattered if it was a stranger. If it was someone that needed help, David would help them.
It was around 3:30 a.m. when David and Nee drove out of his garage. It was unlikely David even noticed another vehicle silently pulling out and following him into the night. Three years after David Stevens' violent death, 21-year-old Nee Norn has come forward to police as a witness to his murder. Though she admits to luring David out of his home to his death, but she puts the blame squarely on her boyfriend, Ronald Barker.
Well, I didn't know he would go through with it. I was scared. So I just did whatever he told me to do.
She's very petite, she's very quiet, very, almost shy. She's portraying herself as basically as an unwitting accomplice, that this was all on Ron, that she was just basically forced to go along with it.
The plan included a prearranged signal from Barker to Nee.
When Barker feels it's the right time, he's going to flash his headlights. She's to say, "Oh, that's my brother, pull over." And that's what, in fact, happens. And the lights start flashing.
Must be my brother.
Brother?
Yeah.
Nee goes to David, "Oh, there's my brother, pull over."
I called him for help, too, just in case.
So he trusted, and he did.
That's your brother's brother?
If David had any misgivings about what's going on, we'll never know.
Ron comes up, there's an introduction.
I'm Brandon. David. I'm her brother. Hey, nice to meet you. Hey.
They all shake hands, everybody's a pal.
Barker gets in to the back seat behind David Stevens. And they start directing him into a commercial area looking for Norn's car.
It's a very industrial area, it's very quiet, not a lot of activity going on.
On this lonely stretch of road, Ron Barker ordered David to pull over.
Norn was in the passenger seat during all of this. Never warned him. Never said he's got a gun. Never said, "Don't pull over." Nothing.
They park. Ron then puts his arm around David's neck and puts the gun to his head.
How do you feel screwing someone's girl?
Nee Norn became quite hysterical at that point because who knows if she even believed that Barker was going to do this.
Welcome to hell.
She didn't want to get into the car with David's body.
I don't want to have anything to do with this.
He was dead. She'd gotten him to that place.
Ron shoved David's crumpled body into the passenger seat.
They need to dispose of David and the car.
With David's lifeless frame still in the front seat, they drove back to Ron's car and then caravanned, picking up gas cans on the way to La Jolla Scenic Drive. First Ron and then Nee pulled over to the side of the road.
Barker took out the gas cans, doused the interior of the car with gas.
Though he didn't realize it, Ron Barker has created a bomb. When he lit it, the blowback seared his arms. He hurried to his car, and he and Nee sped away from the inferno burning in the night.
And they make a pact that if neither one of them ever tells anyone about this, they'll never get caught, and if they take this to the grave, they'll get away with it. And they almost did.
Nee tells police she continued to live with Barker for 3 years after the murder. She had recently separated from Ron, but says she was afraid he would harm her or her family because of what she knew about David's murder. So she decided to come forward.
Norn did talk about David in her statement. She sounded sorry. She sounded sorry that she had done it. She was faced with a choice between David Stevens and Ronald Barker.
Where have you been?
When she chose Ronald Barker, the price was David Stevens' death. And she let the chips fall where they may.
Nee Norn's dramatic statement checks out with forensics. Her DNA, hair, and fingerprints match those found in David's apartment. That mystery is solved. But there is no physical evidence tying Ron Barker to the crime.
All we have is her word that Ronald Barker is the person that was responsible for killing the man. So we ask her to make phone calls to Ronald Barker while we record them in an effort to corroborate out her statement.
Right, I told you that you should not talk to anybody, but you did.
Barker takes the bait.
We're both going down.
No, I didn't kill him. You did.
You bring him to me, Nee. You do. I do it for you, Nee. You asked me to do it.
No,
I did not.
ask you to do it. I never told you
Nee.
to kill him, did I?
Nee.
Did you do it for your ego? You did
Nee,
it
you know what, Nee? Doesn't matter.
He would say, yeah, you were involved. You lured him to me. I killed him, but you're the one that set it up. I couldn't have killed him without you.
I'm going to tell them.
Very interesting how they turned on one another.
Late that night, Barker turns himself in and is questioned by homicide detectives about David's death. At first, he is arrogant.
Tell us what happened.
You know what happened. You know what happened. You have everything. Why you ask me?
He knew that Nee Norn was thinking of going to the police. He didn't know she had gone. Barker thought, if I get to the church first and tell what happened first, that I'll be able to talk my way out of this.
When he discovers Nee Norn has beat him to the punch, he is furious. Still, he tells detectives everything they need to know to charge him with David's murder.
I did it for her. Okay? She wanted him dead as much as I did.
Barker's statements, for the most part, tracked Norn's exactly. The time frames were all there. The sequence of events, the same. Barker was very clear that he did this for Norn, that this was the condition for them staying together.
I'm the one who do it. You know, I do everything for her. You know, maybe that's my weakness. I do it for her.
When Barker rolls up his sleeves, investigators see prominent flash burn scars on his arms.
I kind of leaned in and I was like, whoa. You know, I mean, they were very remarkable scars. He also told us that the reason why he torched the car was to destroy all physical evidence.
Although Nee seemed to think that once she told her story, she would be free to go on with her life, Nee Norn is also charged with murder.
Because she didn't pull the trigger, she didn't dump the gas, she didn't scratch the match, she didn't think she did anything wrong, when in fact, she's the one who set this whole thing in motion by telling Ron Barker what happened and by leading David Stevens to his slaughter.
Mr. Barker, stand, raise your right hand, sir.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony...
In 2003, Ronald Barker is convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Nee Norn is also found guilty of first-degree murder, but that conviction is overturned on appeal. At a new trial in 2007, she is found guilty of second-degree murder and is sentenced to 15 years to life, including time served.
I wish I could tell you why this happened to David Stevens. It's been a lot of years, and I'm still very upset by it. He had a great family, loved him, good job, nice friends. He'd come out to California to kind of seek his dream, as a lot of people do. He wanted to share his life with a woman, have a family. He asked out a gal that he liked, and he worked with, and he trusted. He had sex with her, and she had him killed. I will never understand.
When you have something this tragic that happens, you seem to think that if you can just find who did it, that it will bring you some peace and maybe make you feel a little better about it in some way. And quite frankly, it doesn't. There's no closure to this. There'll never be any closure to this. My friend is dead, and that's something I have to live with the rest of my life.